If I were to ask you to name 2 luxury brands that are known for making beautiful jackets, there's a good chance you would say Chanel and Dior, right? So naturally, inquiring minds want to know which one is better. Luckily for you, I managed to acquire both a Chanel tweed jacket and a Dior bar jacket. So today, these 2 titans of the luxury industry are going to go head to head, and we'll see who makes a better jacket. Chanel jackets always blow me away because, like, you see the product photo and it's like, okay, that looks like a plain white jacket. But then you open it up and it's like, no, there's actually so much more nuance and depth to the color of this tweed. Like, I would say the dominant color is actually blue. Just so many different kinds of threads, different like widths and thicknesses and colors all combined together to make this tweed, and it's like this kind of depth that you can't see easily from product photos. But then when you open it up and look at it in person, it's like, whoa, cool. We'll look at the fiber content now. So surprisingly, it is actually not made of wool. Tweed generally is assumed to be wool, and some of these Chanel jackets would be a wool tweed, but this one is not. It is in fact 52% cotton, 32% viscose, 14% linen, 2% polyamide, which is kind of nylon. And then the lining is 96% silk and 4% elastane, which would give it a little bit of stretch, I guess. And it's a beautiful shade of baby blue with the Chanel double C logo and some flowers on the inside. And like a silk, there's just nothing like it. It is so soft, just really stunning. Let's move on to the Dior jacket now. The fabric on this jacket is quite amazing. It has a very high percentage of wool. And this is where you really get into the difference between like woolens and worsteds. Woolens being like the type of wool you associate with Christmas sweater. It's thick, it's warm, it's kind of itchy. This is so incredibly fine. If you don't know your way around fabric, you would never know this is made of wool. Like, it feels, I don't know what it feels like. Honestly, it kind of feels like a synthetic to me, but it's not. Anyway, it's really beautiful. When you see a high quality wool, you're like, oh. The lining is really gorgeous as well. It is 100% silk. In contrast with the Chanel jacket, this fabric is probably a crepe, which has tightly twisted yarns that give it this kind of pebbly appearance, whereas the Chanel jacket is more of a satin weave. So it produces a different effect because it has a different weave, but I think it is equally stunning. Now I want to talk about fit. Let's start with the Dior jacket. Okay, first things first, may I just say, this is a hot girl jacket. It's giving body yaddy 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 yaddy, or however many times Megan Thee Stallion says it. Now the hips flare out in a bit of an exaggerated manner on this jacket, which some people may find unappealing. I explain why that is in my Dior bar jacket video, where I compare this jacket to the original bar jacket from the 1940s. I think it's kind of a fun shape, but the cinched in waist is the thing that I really love. Anyway, 10 out of 10 for the fit on the Dior jacket. Onto the fit of the Chanel jacket, and I am filming in a different location, as you can see, because some of the audio unfortunately didn't record. So the fit of the Chanel jacket is kind of weird, if I'm being perfectly honest with you. The waist is quite fitted, especially with this belt on, and I don't think I'd want the waist to be tighter than that, especially if I was going to try to wear something underneath, like a dress shirt. But the shoulders are extremely roomy, which is fine if you want to wear something bulky underneath, but I wouldn't want to wear something bulky underneath this because then the waist would be too tight. So I find it a bit odd. I don't know if that would be a typical fit of Chanel jackets, and I don't love the fit on me personally. Now I'm going to move on to talking about construction, which is one of my favorite things to talk about, but also the nerdiest. I always love the line work in Chanel jackets. Seams are not just like haphazardly placed. They're very deliberate, and details like pockets are also very deliberately placed in order to correspond nicely with the seams. So we have this pocket here, there's one on each side. As you can see, there's a princess seam here that goes from the shoulder. Yep, it's going from the shoulder. It goes all the way down to the hem, and the pocket is right there in between so that it's nicely aligned between that princess seam and then this other side panel seam, which goes, I believe, up into the armpit. Yep, it's going up into the armpit there, and goes down to the hem. And so these 2 panel seams here, one's a princess, one's, I guess, more of a panel, they really provide shape to the garment. That's another sign of quality. Like, most jackets are going to have some sort of like dart or princess in the front to accommodate the bust, to give shaping, unless they're really boxy or they're really cutting corners and being cheap, in which case the result is going to be boxy whether or not they wanted it to be. So in this case, they have not 1 but 2 of these seams to provide shaping, so that's a good sign of a quality garment. And then this pocket just nicely tucked in there in between to not be like overlapping either of the seams, which would be fine. I don't mind having a pocket overlapping the seams, but this is Chanel. They have a very particular view of what quality is, of how a garment should be made. So this pocket is just like tucked in there between those two seams so as not to be too obtrusive. And I also like how this pocket is also lined with that same beautiful baby blue silk as the rest of the coat is lined with. So that's a sign of nice quality. Some pockets are not lined at all, and if they are, it's probably a cheap lining. This is 96% silk, so clearly not a cheap lining. The lines on the Dior jacket are also really, really clean, from the princess seams to the darts. And I find their pocket at the hip area particularly ingenious. The original bar jacket is very exaggerated at the hips, and so they wanted to recreate that, but in a more wearable fashion. And these pockets help contribute to that. A lot of pockets typically are made to be quite subtle and non-obtrusive, like we saw with the Chanel jacket. Sometimes they're even hidden. But in this case, they made them really big and obvious, position them right at the hip area, and probably like interface them or line them with something to give them a bit more rigidity and stiffness so they kind of stand up on their own. And that, in my opinion, is a really smart way of contributing to that exaggerated bell hip shape without having to put a bunch of layers and stuff in it like the original bar jacket would have had. One of the things I absolutely love about tailored jackets is that they're an absolute treasure trove of secrets. They have all these layers of padding and interfacing and interlining, God knows what else. These inner fabrics and padding, which I'm going to call interconstruction, help to stabilize the jacket, give it extra strength in high wear areas, and contribute to giving it that desired tailored shape. You can tell that the Chanel jacket has plenty of interconstruction because it has a certain stiffness to it, especially these front panels here. Like, look at that corner. That is such a beautiful corner, and it has a certain rigidity to it. It's not just like falling in on itself. So there is definitely an interface or canvas in there of some sort. It feels like it has a bit of a shoulder pad as well, which would be typical for a jacket like this. The Dior jacket has comparatively quite a bit less interconstruction, in my estimation at least. It does have padding in the hip area to give it that exaggerated shape, and a shoulder pad, which you can obviously feel in real life, but you can even see it a bit on camera because it's bouncing a bit. I would imagine that there is interfacing or interlining of some sort, especially in the front panels and particularly at the front placket where the buttons and buttonholes are. However, as you can see from this video from Dior's website, it is extremely flexible in the waist. It kind of crumples in on itself, which suggests that there is not very much or possibly any interconstruction in there. Similarly, when I held this jacket up to the window, it let in a lot of light. Now, granted, it is a light colored fabric, same with the lining, which is a little bit sheer. However, the Chanel jacket is also a light colored fabric, and it's a chunky tweed, which means there's more spaces between the yarns to let light in. I didn't record myself holding the Chanel jacket up to the window, but it is opaque. There would be absolutely no light coming in through there. This suggests to me that the Chanel jacket has quite a bit of interconstruction, whereas the Dior jacket doesn't have quite as much. The cynical explanation for why the Dior jacket has less interconstruction would be that they're cutting corners in order to save money and have a higher profit margin on this jacket. The less cynical explanation would be that it was a deliberate choice made to have a jacket that's more wearable, flexible, and comfortable for everyday wear. I suspect that both explanations are true in this instance. I'm certain that there was a very deliberate decision made to have this jacket be less rigid and more comfortable. However, I'm sure that cost cutting is always top of mind for these luxury conglomerates. Now, something I find really fascinating is the hand stitching on both these jackets. Okay, this is really interesting. So the lining of the sleeve appears to be hand sewn in. Do you see those tiny little hand stitches? Same with the hem at the bottom of both the Chanel and Dior jackets. Part of the lining is sewn to the body fabric by machine. This would have been done when the jacket was inside out, but they left a hole in the middle of the hem so that they could pull it right side out, and then they hand stitched that hole closed. In a cheaper jacket that you get from, say, Zara, they would pull the lining out through the sleeve instead in order to avoid hand sewing. I've linked an article below if you want to understand what that looks like. Hand stitching is more the domain of haute couture. Most ready-to-wear or things you buy from the mall or online, you're not going to really see hand stitching because it's too labor-intensive and therefore expensive. So the fact that both of these jackets do have hand stitching is a sign of a higher quality product. Something that both these jackets do very well is luxurious trims. These buttons are really pretty. They have kind of a handmade look to them almost. They're these really pretty vintage looking buttons with the Chanel double C, some whimsical flowers. These buttonholes look really good. Like, this is not that BS that you'd get from fast fashion stuff. This is a nice buttonhole. They also have this chain here at the bottom of the hem, which is a Chanel classic, and my understanding of why they did that is because in the olden days, maybe they didn't have as much knowledge of technique as they do now, and so, you know, Chanel would have put that chain in the hem of the jacket to have it sit really nicely and have that hem be heavy enough to like have a nice smooth curve. Whereas now they don't really need to do that, but I think they still include the little chain in there just for like aesthetic reasons and for house codes. You can see with the Dior jacket as well, these buttons are really beautiful. They're covered with self fabric, which is the main body fabric, and the buttonholes are impeccable. We love to see it. So before I delve into which one I think is a better jacket, let me tell you a bit about them. In some ways, we're not really comparing apples to apples here. Obviously, the Chanel fabric is a tweed, which would be a lot more labor intensive, I think, to make than a twill weave fabric of one color that the Dior jacket is made of. The Chanel jacket is secondhand. It's from 2005, and I purchased it secondhand for about $4,000 US. The Dior jacket is brand spanking new. It cost about $5,000 US. So to buy new, the Chanel jacket is obviously a more expensive jacket. And these days, if you were to buy a new Chanel jacket, it would run into the 5 figures most likely. So while they are both blazer style tailored jackets with a collar and lapel and a lining, in some ways they are pretty fundamentally different. So we're kind of comparing apples to pears here, but I still think there's a lot to be learned from it. So we keep on trucking. So which one of them is more worth the money? Well, arguably neither of them, to be frank. First of all, construction and fabric aside, which I do believe are good quality on both of these, neither of these jackets are made to your measurements, so you're going to be paying a lot of money for something that potentially doesn't even really fit you. And because they're not custom made to you, I have to assume that there is a lot of markup in both of these jackets, because custom patterning a jacket and doing like fittings and stuff is part of why a lot of tailored jackets that are made bespoke are really expensive. With designer jackets like these, even though, like I said, I do believe both of them are good quality, there's no getting around the fact that you're paying a lot of money for the brand. If you want a high quality jacket that fits you impeccably, you can get one for the same price I paid for either of these jackets, possibly even less, from a local tailor. The quality of the fabric, trims, and construction will be amazing. It will fit you perfectly, you can fully customize it to your liking, and you'll be supporting a local business of independent artisans who are keeping this beautiful tailoring tradition alive. That said, part of the reason that a lot of people gravitate towards these luxury houses is that they do want to pay for the brand. These houses have history and heritage and prestige that a lot of people find very alluring, myself included, if I'm being honest. So best value for money is not everything. So let's finally cut to the chase. Which of these two jackets do I think is better? Well, the Chanel jacket certainly has more bells and whistles construction-wise, in my opinion. The Dior jacket, for what it is perfectly executed, in my opinion. The lines are clean, the fabrics are beautiful and made of fine fibers, the stitching is immaculate. So for what it is absolutely stunning, but what it is just not that hardcore tailoring-wise, from what I can tell anyway. I certainly think that there is value in having a beautiful, shapely, well-made blazer that is more flexible and comfortable for daily life, but such a piece is less expensive to produce than something that has a lot of interconstruction to it. So is it really worth $5,000? Debatable. The Chanel jacket has more complex interconstruction, and the tweed is just really beautiful. Like, I can't articulate how truly stunning and nuanced and deep it is. It's kind of something you have to see for yourself. But then again, the price of buying a Chanel jacket new is considerably more than the Dior jacket, and I don't like the fit anywhere near as much. Of course, if you really fall in love with a Chanel jacket, or any jacket for that matter, you can get it altered to fit you perfectly. I'm sure that's a service that Chanel probably offers, and in fact, they may well offer it for free if you're buying a piece from them. Ultimately, if you really love it, I don't think there's necessarily anything wrong with buying an expensive luxury jacket like either of these two. I do think they're good quality. I don't think you're like getting scammed or whatever. Just be aware that you are paying a hefty price tag for the brand. As always, it is my preference to buy secondhand just because of a value for money thing, but also due to ethics, as I describe in my The Dark Side of Dior video. Some of these luxury brands are not entirely transparent about where their products are being made and under what conditions, so there is that to consider as well. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it, and I'll see you in the next next video.